On a cold night in 1965, 3 million Americans sat down in their living rooms, believing they were about to watch justice be served. They believed a criminal would finally be exposed, a monster dragged into the light, a dangerous black man humiliated by a calm, respectable voice behind a mahogany desk. They were wrong. What they actually witnessed was the slow, methodical destruction of one of the most powerful men in American media by the very man he thought he was about to dominate. This is not the story of a gangster losing his temper. This is the story of a man who understood power so well that he never raised his voice, never clenched his fists, and never once broke the rules of live television, while using those rules to ruin his enemy forever. In 1965, New York City was splitting at the seams. The civil rights movement reshaped the streets, but not the studios. Harlem was boiling, and Midtown was pretending nothing was wrong. Television, the most powerful weapon in the fistfight country, belonged entirely to men who looked like Julian Westbrook, men who decided who was civilized, who was dangerous, and who deserved to be feared. Julian Westbrook was not a cartoon villain. He didn't burn crosses. He didn't shout slurs. He smiled. He asked reasonable questions. And he believed, deep in his bones, that men like Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson existed to be explained, controlled, and ultimately erased. Bumpy Johnson understood something Westbrook never did. Power doesn't come from microphones. It comes from leverage. And on this night, Bumpy walked into that studio holding all of it. Stay with me and you will see how a live television interview became a battlefield, how a man with no degree outplayed a media empire, how racism dressed as professionalism collapsed in real time, and how silence, timing, and preparation can be deadlier than violence. Because this wasn't an interview, it was a trap. And the man who said it was the one who didn't survive it. This is the night America learned that intelligence doesn't need permission, and that the most dangerous man in the room is often the one everyone thinks they understand. In 1965, New York City wasn't one city. It was two. Uptown, Harlem lived under pressure, not the loud, cinematic kind people imagined, but the constant, grinding pressure of survival. Landlords ignored broken heat in winter. Police treated sidewalks like checkpoints. Banks refused loans. Schools expected failure and delivered it efficiently. Harlem didn't explode overnight. It simmered, quietly, insistently, like a storm forming just beyond the horizon. Downtown in Midtown Manhattan, pressure didn't exist. There were no protests inside Rockefeller Center, no batons, no sirens, only marble floors, polished shoes, and men who spoke calmly about chaos happening somewhere else. To the newspapers, Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson was a headline. Gangster, crime boss, kingpin. To Harlem, he was something far more complicated. Bumpy Johnson did not rule with fear. He ruled with order. He settled disputes before they turned into shootings. He made sure rent got paid when the city wouldn't help. He kept outsiders, especially reckless ones, from turning Harlem into a war zone. Violence was bad for business, chaos was bad for survival, and Bumpy Johnson understood survival better than most men understood comfort. What frightened men like Julian Westbrook wasn't Bumpy's criminal record. It was his mind. Bumpy read constantly, philosophy, history, economics. He studied men. He studied patterns. He studied how power moved when people weren't paying attention. Prison didn't break him. It trained him. He learned that men reveal themselves when they believe they are superior, and that patience, practiced deliberately, was the sharpest weapon of all. Julian Westbrook lived in a world where control was assumed. He controlled the questions. He controlled the lighting. He controlled the edits. He believed the camera transformed him into authority, and everyone else into a subject. To Westbrook, Harlem wasn't a place. It was a concept, a problem, A story that needed narrating by someone responsible. And ratings were slipping. Younger reporters were in the streets now, covering protests, showing police dogs and broken bones. Westbrook's calm voice suddenly sounded old, safe, replaceable. He needed relevance. He needed a moment. And then someone said the name Bumpy Johnson, a villain America already believed in, a black man who could be provoked, a gangster who would surely crack under pressure. Westbrook didn't want a conversation. He wanted a collapse. The invitation arrived on thick cream-colored cardstock, heavy, expensive, polite, designed to look respectful while functioning as a summons. When it arrived at Lenox Terrace, Bumpy's inner circle didn't debate. Don't go. They understood television. The microphone only points one way. The edit always wins. Men like Westbrook never invite equals. They invite sacrifices. Bumpy sat quietly, reading the card twice. He knew it was a trap, and he knew something else too. If he refused, the story would be written for him. Coward, hiding, afraid of the white man with the microphone. Bumpy Johnson had spent his entire life dismantling traps by stepping into them willingly. Finally, he looked up. "I'm going," he said, not because he underestimated Julian Westbrook, but because he understood him perfectly. Julian Westbrook believed he was inviting a criminal into his house. What he didn't realize was that he had just invited a patient man with nothing to lose, and time on his side. The drive from Harlem to Midtown took less than 20 minutes. For Bumpy Johnson, it felt like crossing a border. The Cadillac rolled south, past 110th Street, an invisible line everyone in New York understood without ever acknowledging. On one side, music spilled from music. Doorways, men argued on stoops, women laughed despite the cold. Life lived out loud because privacy was a luxury. On the other, glass, steel, and silence. Men in overcoats didn't look at one another. The city moved quickly but felt strangely dead. Inside the car, no one spoke. Bumpy adjusted his cufflinks, checked the knot of his tie, touched the brim of his fedora, set just low enough to shadow his eyes. He wasn't dressing for television. He was dressing for combat. Westbrook expected a caricature. Bumpy intended to arrive as a contradiction. His suit was Italian, charcoal gray, perfectly tailored, not flashy, not loud, expensive in a way that made men uncomfortable because it asked an unspoken question. If he's a criminal, why does he look like he belongs here? Rockefeller Center rose from the street like a fortress. When the Cadillac stopped, the engine idled longer than necessary. The doorman hesitated. He looked at Bumpy, looked away, looked again. Then he opened the door without offering his hand. A small thing, but intentional. No greeting, no "sir," just space, meant to remind Bumpy where he was not supposed to be. Bumpy stepped out anyway. He didn't hurry, he didn't hesitate. He walked through the lobby like a man returning to a place that owed him something. Inside, the building reacted. Conversations stopped, footsteps slowed, eyes tracked him. It wasn't fear, it was offense. A black man in a suit that cost more than their annual bonus was an insult to the building itself. They had seen black men here before, carrying trays, mops, mail, not walking like owners. "Security will need to check you," the receptionist said, her voice tight. 2 guards stepped forward, ex-cops, thick necks, hands hovering near their belts. One stepped too close. "Arms out," he said, "standard procedure." Bumpy didn't move. He looked at the guard and waited. "I am a guest of Mr. Westbrook," Bumpy said quietly. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried. "I am unarmed. My men are unarmed." A pause. "If you touch me, I will leave." Another pause. "And 3 million people will stare at an empty chair tonight." The guard hesitated. Time mattered. Ratings mattered. The guard stepped back. It was the first victory of the night, and it required no effort at all. They moved through the corridors, Portraits of powerful white men stared down from the walls. Writers stopped typing as Bumpy passed. Faces appeared behind glass. Whispers followed him. That's him. That's the gangster. That's the animal. Bumpy heard none of it. He was already ahead of them. The green room was small, beige, bare, stale fruit on a folding table. It wasn't an oversight. It was instruction. This is your place. Bumpy didn't sit. He stood in the center of the room, calm, still, unshrinking. Somewhere above him, Julian Westbrook was reviewing his notes, practicing his tone, imagining the applause. What he didn't realize was that the power dynamic he believed in had already collapsed the moment Bumpy Johnson stepped through the door. Julian Westbrook did not enter the green room like a host. He entered like a man inspecting livestock. He stopped just inside the doorway, leaving it open behind him, a reminder that this was not Bumpy Johnson's space. "Mr. Johnson," he said. No hand extended, no welcome, just a name delivered like a diagnosis. In person, Westbrook was taller than he looked on television. Perfect hair, perfect teeth, a face sculpted for trust. He smelled of expensive cologne and entitlement. "I'm glad you decided to show up," Westbrook continued. "Frankly, we had a backup segment ready. Botanical gardens, very popular with our audience." A pause. "We weren't sure you'd have the nerve." It was bait. Bumpy turned slowly. "I've never been accused of lacking nerve," he said calmly. Westbrook smiled, not warmly, calculating. "This isn't the street," Westbrook said, stepping closer. "This is national television. There are rules here." He lowered his voice, the tone adults use with children. Decorum, clarity, proper language. A brief smile. "Our audience isn't used to your dialect. Try to articulate. We don't want to confuse anyone." It was surgical. Polite racism, sanitized contempt. Bumpy didn't react. No tightening of the jaw, no flare of the eyes. He studied Westbrook like a man observing a predictable machine. "I'll do my best to be understood," Bumpy said. He paused. "Julian." Westbrook stiffened. "Mr. Westbrook," he corrected sharply. "On air," Bumpy nodded. "We'll see." The room shifted. Westbrook felt it, though he didn't yet understand why. He searched Bumpy's face for anger, found none, and that disturbed him. Anger could be controlled, calm could not. "5 minutes to air," Westbrook said, already backing toward the door. "Don't be late." The door closed. Nat Pettigrew exhaled through his nose. "Let me break his jaw," he muttered, "just once." Bumpy adjusted his cufflinks. "That's what he wants," he said quietly. "If I hit him, he wins." He looked toward the door. "Tonight, we don't fight him with fists." A pause. "We kill him with the truth." A stage manager appeared, young, pale, terrified. "Mr. Johnson," he said, "we're ready for you." Bumpy straightened his jacket, calm, centered, prepared. Julian Westbrook believed the interview hadn't started yet. He was wrong. It began the moment he mistook silence for weakness. The studio floor was a different world. Hot, bright, exposed, banks of lights poured down from above, generating a physical heat that clung to the skin. Cameras rolled silently on thick rubber wheels. Boom microphones hovered like mechanical vultures. Beyond the circle of light sat the audience, 300 people, almost all white. They murmured as Bumpy Johnson stepped onto the set. Not fear, curiosity, the kind reserved for animals brought out of cages. Julian Westbrook was already seated behind his desk, leather chair, polished wood, commanding posture. Opposite him stood Bumpy's seat, wooden, unpadded, slightly lower. It wasn't accidental. It was framing the civilized man and the criminal, comfort versus restraint, authority versus subject. Bumpy walked to the chair, sat, crossed his legs, folded his hands, and looked comfortable, regal. The wooden chair no longer looked like a punishment. It looked like a throne. A makeup assistant rushed in. She powdered Westbrook's nose, hands practiced and fast. She hesitated near Bumpy, sponge hovering. "I'm fine, darling," Bumpy said gently. "I don't wear a mask." A ripple moved through the audience. Westbrook heard it and bristled. 30 seconds, the floor director said. The red lights flickered on. 20 seconds. Silence fell heavy. 10. Westbrook inhaled and became the man America trusted. "Good evening," Westbrook said smoothly. "I'm Julian Westbrook, and this is City in Focus." He smiled for the camera. "Tonight we take you into the dark heart of Harlem, a world of vice, shadows, and violence." He turned toward Bumpy. "And joining us is the man the police call its cancer, Mr. Ellsworth Johnson. They call him Bumpy." A beat. The audience leaned forward. "Thank you for coming, Mr. Johnson," Westbrook continued, "though I suppose I should check my wallet before we begin." Laughter. Not everyone, but enough. Westbrook smiled. He had drawn first blood. Bumpy didn't smile. He waited. Let the laughter die. "You're welcome to check your wallet," Bumpy said evenly. "But the only people stealing from the poor in this city are the ones sitting in the banks downtown, not the ones living in Harlem." Silence. Not polite silence. Shock. Westbrook blinked, just once. "Very clever," Westbrook said, waving it off. "But let's deal in facts." He leaned forward. "Police records show you run a numbers racket that drains the savings of desperate families. Milk money, rent money." He gestured toward Bumpy's suit. "How do you justify Italian tailoring paid for by hungry children?" Bumpy leaned forward slightly. "The numbers game," he said, "is the poor man's stock market." A murmur rippled through the audience. "Wall Street gambles with millions every day. When they lose, the government rescues them." He looked directly at Westbrook. "When a black woman puts a dime on a number hoping to pay her rent, the police kick down her door." A pause. "Why is gambling a business downtown and a crime uptown?" Westbrook's jaw tightened. This wasn't going according to plan. The audience wasn't laughing anymore. And for the first time that night, Julian Westbrook realized something was wrong. Very wrong. The man in the wooden chair was not defending himself. He was prosecuting. Julian. Westbrook smiled, but it no longer reached his eyes. Something had shifted in the room and he could feel it. The audience wasn't with him anymore. They were watching him. And Julian Westbrook had never been comfortable under observation. "Because it's against the law," he snapped suddenly, the Polish cracking. "And because it breeds violence." His voice hardened. "Men die in Harlem, shots fired, bodies on sidewalks." He leaned forward, finger tightening on the desk. "Are you denying that blood has been spilled on your orders?" This was the moment America expected. The denial, the rage, the outburst. "I deny that I'm the cause of it," Bumpy said calmly. The calm unsettled the room. Violence in Harlem is born of poverty, of despair, of a system that refuses to hire a black man for anything more than sweeping a floor. He paused, letting the words land. "You want to talk about blood, Mr. Westbrook?" Westbrook didn't answer. "Let's talk about landlords who leave families without heat in January. Let's talk about police who break teenagers' ribs for standing on corners." Bumpy leaned back slightly. "I didn't build the jungle. I just learned how to survive in it." Westbrook exhaled sharply. This wasn't supposed to be a lecture. It was supposed to be a spectacle. He decided to wound. "You speak very confidently about economics," Westbrook said, the tone sharpening into something uglier. "But let's be honest." A pause. "You're not an educated man, Mr. Johnson." The audience stiffened. "You didn't attend universities. You didn't study finance." He tilted his head. "You spent your youth in prison, not libraries." Then the knife. "Do you truly believe you have the intellectual capacity to lecture the American public on morality and money?" The room went electric. This was the insult. This was the line. Bumpy Johnson said nothing. He looked at Westbrook and waited. Seconds stretched. Westbrook shifted in his chair. The audience leaned forward. Silence filled the studio, thick, heavy, suffocating. Silence was not hesitation. It was aiming. "I may not have a degree from Harvard," Bumpy said quietly at last, "but I have a degree from Sing Sing." A ripple of shock moved through the room. "I've studied men like you in confined spaces." A faint smile. "And I've read more books in my cell than you've read in your entire life." He turned slightly toward the camera. "You read teleprompters. I read history." Then back to Westbrook. "And history teaches us something very important." A pause. "Men who believe they are naturally superior always think they are winning, right up until the moment the world changes." Westbrook's face flushed, pink, then red. He was losing the room. He needed a kill shot, something personal, something unforgivable. He leaned in, lowered his voice, made it intimate. "Let's talk about your family." A murmur moved through the audience. "Your daughter?" Bumpy's expression did not change, but the air did. Westbrook smiled thinly. He believed he had found the weak spot. He believed he was about to end this. What he didn't realize was that he had just stepped onto the most dangerous ground imaginable, because the next words out of his mouth would destroy him forever. Julian Westbrook leaned forward, not aggressively, confidently, the way men do when they believe they have finally found leverage. "Your daughter," Westbrook said calmly, his voice now dripping with concern. "She attends a private school, doesn't she?" Bumpy's eyes remained steady. "Rides in nice cars, lives far from the violence you say you don't cause." A beat. "So here's what America wants to know, Mr. Johnson." He smiled faintly. "If Harlem is so misunderstood, why don't you raise your own child there?" The question landed like a gunshot. No laughter, no murmurs, even the cameras seemed to hesitate. The audience stiffened, realizing too late that they were witnessing something obscene. This was no longer journalism. This was an execution attempt. Bumpy did not blink, did not breathe. For a long moment, he said nothing. And in that silence, the studio began to understand. This man was not deciding what to say. He was deciding how much damage to do. "You're right," Bumpy said quietly. The audience shifted. "My daughter does not live in Harlem." Westbrook's eyes gleamed. He thought he had won. "And do you know why?" Bumpy continued. He leaned forward slightly. "Because Harlem isn't dangerous by accident." His voice remained calm, deadly. "It is dangerous because men with power decided black children were expendable." He looked directly into the camera. "Because banks refuse loans, schools receive scraps, police treat boys like enemies." Back to Westbrook. "I did not create that. I send my daughter away," Bumpy said, "for the same reason wealthy white men send their children to private schools." A pause. "To protect them from a system that feeds on the poor." He let that settle. "The difference is, when white men do it, it's called responsibility." Silence. "When I do it, it's called hypocrisy." Westbrook opened his mouth, closed it. His face had lost all color. He was no longer in control of the narrative. He was inside it. "You asked why I don't raise my daughter in Harlem," Bumpy said. His voice dropped. "I'll ask you something in return." A beat. "Would you raise yours there?" Westbrook froze. The answer didn't matter. His silence said everything. The audience did not applaud. They couldn't. Applause would have felt obscene. They sat in stunned stillness, realizing they had just watched a man's mask dissolve on live television. The red recording light still burned. America was still watching. And Julian Westbrook understood, too late, that this interview would follow him for the rest of his life, because no amount of editing could save him now. Julian Westbrook leaned forward, not aggressively, confidently, the way men do when they believe they have finally found leverage. Your daughter, Westbrook said calmly, his voice now dripping with concern. She attends a private school, doesn't she? Bumpy's eyes remained steady. Rides in nice cars, lives far from the violence you say you don't cause. A beat. So here's what America wants to know, Mr. Johnson. He smiled faintly. If Harlem is so misunderstood, why don't you raise your own child there? The question landed like a gunshot. No laughter, no murmurs. Even the cameras seemed to hesitate. The audience stiffened, realizing too late that they were witnessing something obscene. This was no longer journalism. This was an execution attempt. Bumpy did not blink, did not breathe. For a long moment he said nothing, and in that silence, the studio began. To understand, this man was not deciding what to say. He was deciding how much damage to do. You're right, Bumpy said quietly. The audience shifted. My daughter does not live in Harlem. Westbrook's eyes gleamed. He thought he had won. And do you know why? Bumpy continued. He leaned forward slightly. Because Harlem isn't dangerous by accident. His voice remained calm, deadly. It is dangerous because men with power decided black children were expendable. He looked directly into the camera. Because banks refuse loans, schools receive scraps, police treat boys like enemies. Back to Westbrook. I did not create that. I send my daughter away, Bumpy said, for the same reason wealthy white men send their children to private schools. A pause. To protect them from a system that feeds on the poor. He let that settle. The difference is, when white men do it, it's called responsibility. Silence. When I do it, it's called hypocrisy. Westbrook opened his mouth, closed it. His face had lost all color. He was no longer in control of the narrative. He was inside it. You asked why I don't raise my daughter in Harlem, Bumpy said. His voice dropped. I'll ask you something in return. A beat. Would you raise yours there? Westbrook froze. The answer didn't matter. His silence said everything. The audience did not applaud. They couldn't. Applause would have felt obscene. They sat in stunned stillness, realizing they had just watched a man's mask dissolve on live television. The red recording light still burned. America was still watching, and Julian Westbrook understood, too late, that this interview would follow him for the rest of his life, because no amount of editing could save him now.